Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mexico, a country known for its rich cultural tapestry and predominantly Catholic heritage, is home to a small but growing Muslim community. This exploration delves into the fascinating world of Islam in Mexico, tracing its historical roots, examining current demographics, and shedding light on the daily lives and challenges faced by Mexican Muslims. From the arrival of crypto-Muslims during the Spanish colonial era to the modern-day growth of indigenous converts, we'll uncover the unique story of Islam's presence in this North American nation. We'll look at the numbers, explore the daily practices of Muslims in various parts of Mexico, discuss the obstacles they face, and examine the state of Islamophobia in the country. This comprehensive overview offers a glimpse into a lesser-known aspect of Mexico's diverse religious landscape, highlighting the experiences of a minority community as they navigate faith, culture, and identity in contemporary Mexican society. The story of Islam in Mexico is a tale that spans centuries, filled with intriguing twists and turns. It all begins in the tumultuous period of the 16th century, a time of great change and exploration. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in what is now Mexico in the early 1500s, they weren't alone. Among their ranks were a number of individuals known as Moriscos. These were Muslims who had been forcibly converted to Christianity in Spain, but many of whom still secretly practiced Islam. They were fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, which had made life in Spain increasingly dangerous for anyone suspected of non-Christian beliefs. Now, you might be wondering, why would Muslims join a Christian conquest? Well, it's a bit complicated. Some saw it as an opportunity to escape persecution, while others had fully embraced their new Christian identity. But for those secret Muslims, the New World offered a chance at freedom to practice their faith away from the watchful eyes of the Inquisition. However, life wasn't exactly easy for these crypto-Muslims in the New World either. The Inquisition followed the colonizers across the Atlantic, and practices associated with Islam were strictly forbidden. This meant that any Islamic practices had to be kept extremely secret, often disguised as Catholic traditions. There's an interesting tidbit about this period. Some historians believe that certain Islamic architectural influences can be seen in some early colonial Mexican buildings. It's a controversial claim, but it's fun to imagine secret Muslim artisans leaving their mark on the landscape. Despite this early presence, Islam didn't really take root in Mexico during this period. The secrecy required and the dominance of Catholicism meant that these early Muslim influences largely faded away over time. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and we see the next significant wave of Islamic influence in Mexico. This time, it came in the form of immigrants from the Middle East, particularly from countries like Lebanon and Syria. Many of these immigrants were Christians, but a notable number were Muslims. These immigrants, often referred to as Turcos in Mexico, even though most weren't from Turkey, came seeking economic opportunities. They settled in various parts of Mexico, with significant communities forming in places like Mexico City and the northern state of Coahuila. It's worth noting that this immigration wasn't always smooth sailing. In the 1920s and 1930s, there were periods of anti-immigrant sentiment in Mexico, which affected these Middle Eastern communities. Despite these challenges, many of these immigrants and their descendants integrated into Mexican society while maintaining aspects of their cultural and religious heritage. This period saw the establishment of the first organized Muslim communities in Mexico. The first Islamic organization in Mexico, the Asociación Islámica Mexicana, was founded in 1950 in Mexico City. In more recent decades, particularly since the 1980s, there's been another wave of Muslim immigration to Mexico. This includes people from countries like Pakistan, Morocco, and Egypt, as well as Muslim converts from other parts of Latin America. An interesting development in recent years has been the growth of Islam among indigenous Mexican communities. Some indigenous groups, particularly in the southern state of Chiapas, have found resonance between Islamic teachings and their traditional beliefs, leading to a unique fusion of cultural practices. All right, let's zoom in on the numbers and demographics of Muslims in Mexico. It's an interesting picture, but I've got to warn you, getting precise figures can be a bit tricky. So, according to the most recent reliable surveys and estimates, we're looking at a Muslim population in Mexico of around 3,700 people. Now, in a country with over 130 million inhabitants, that's a tiny fraction. We're talking less than 0.01% of the total population. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, but a very interesting needle. Now you might be wondering, how accurate is this number? Well, to be honest, it's our best estimate, but it could be a bit off. Some Muslim community leaders argue that the actual number might be higher, possibly up to 5,000 or even 7,000. The thing is, Mexico's census doesn't ask about religion in great detail. So we're relying on smaller surveys and community estimates. What's really intriguing is the growth trend. While 3,700 might not sound like a lot, it's actually a significant increase from previous decades. In the 1950s, you could count the number of Muslims in Mexico on your fingers and toes. By the 1990s, estimates were in the hundreds, so we're seeing a definite upward trend, even if the overall numbers are still small. Now, let's break it down a bit further. When it comes to the split between Sunni and Shia Muslims, we're mostly working with educated guesses based on community reports. The vast majority of Muslims in Mexico are Sunni. We're talking about 90 to 95% of that 3,700 figure. So, doing some quick math, that's roughly 3,300 to 3,500 Sunni Muslims. The Shia community is much smaller, making up the remaining 5 to 10%. We're looking at maybe 200 to 400 Shia Muslims in the whole country. It's a small community, but they're there. There's also a small presence of other Islamic denominations. For instance, there's a tiny Ahmadiyya community, probably numbering less than 100 individuals. These folks aren't recognized as Muslim by many mainstream Islamic authorities, but they self-identify as Muslim. What's really fascinating is the diversity within this small community. You've got descendants of those early 20th century immigrants from Lebanon and Syria, more recent immigrants from countries like Pakistan and Egypt, and a growing number of Mexican converts to Islam. Speaking of converts, that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. There's been increasing interest in Islam among some Mexicans, particularly in indigenous communities. Some estimates suggest that converts might make up as much as 30 to 40% of the Muslim population in Mexico now. It's hard to pin down exact numbers, but it's definitely a noticeable trend. Age-wise, the Muslim community in Mexico tends to skew younger than the general population. A lot of this is due to the convert population and more recent immigrants. Geographically, Muslims in Mexico aren't evenly spread out. You'll find the largest concentrations in urban areas, particularly Mexico City, which probably has about a third of the country's Muslim population. Other cities with notable Muslim communities include Torreón in Coahuila State, Guadalajara in Jalisco, and San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas. All right, let's dive into the daily lives of Muslims in Mexico. It's a fascinating blend of Islamic traditions and Mexican culture that really shows how adaptable people can be. So, picture this. You're a Muslim in Mexico City, or maybe Torreón. Your day might start with the Fajr prayer at dawn. But here's the thing. There aren't many mosques around, so you're probably praying at home. If you're lucky enough to live near one of the few mosques, like the Centro Educativo de la Comunidad Musulmana in Mexico City, you might head there for prayers, especially on Fridays for Jumu'ah. Now let's talk food. This is where it gets really interesting. Mexico is famous for its cuisine, but a lot of traditional dishes contain pork or lard. So Muslims in Mexico have had to get creative. Many have become expert at adapting Mexican recipes to make them halal. Imagine halal tacos al pastor made with beef or chicken instead of pork, or vegetarian enchiladas. Some folks have even started small businesses selling halal Mexican food. Finding halal meat can be a challenge, especially outside of major cities. In places like Mexico City or Torreón, there are a few halal butchers, but in smaller towns, you might have to become a vegetarian or rely on fish and eggs for protein. Some Muslims have taken to raising their own chickens to ensure they have halal meat. When it comes to work and school, Muslims in Mexico are in all sorts of fields. You've got doctors, teachers, business owners, students, you name it. They're generally well integrated into Mexican society. But there can be some challenges. For example, during Ramadan, it can be tough to explain to co-workers why you're not joining them for that long, delicious lunch break that's so common in Mexico. Speaking of Ramadan, it's observed just like anywhere else in the world, but with a Mexican twist. Iftar meals might include dates, imported of course, alongside tamales or pozole. Some mosques and Islamic centers organize community iftars. which are great opportunities for Muslims to come together and for curious non-Muslim Mexicans to learn about Islam. Education is a big focus for many Muslim families. There are a few Islamic schools in Mexico, like the one attached to the Centro Educativo de la Comunidad Musulmana in Mexico City. But they're few and far between, so most Muslim kids attend regular Mexican schools. This means parents often take on the responsibility of teaching their children about Islam and Arabic at home or in weekend classes. In terms of clothing, most Muslims in Mexico dress like any other Mexicans. You'll see some women wearing hijabs, especially in more conservative communities or around mosques, but it's not super common to see full coverings like niqabs or burqas on the streets of Mexico City. Community life often centers around the mosque or Islamic center, especially in cities with established Muslim populations. These centers don't just serve as places of worship. They're cultural hubs where people gather for educational events, celebrations of Islamic holidays, and social activities. Interestingly, dawah, inviting others to Islam, has become a significant activity for some Muslims in Mexico. There's a growing interest in Islam among some Mexicans, particularly in indigenous communities. Some Muslims actively engage in outreach, organizing informational events or distributing literature about Islam. As for where Muslims live, as I mentioned earlier, they're mostly concentrated in urban areas. Mexico City has the largest Muslim population, with significant communities also found in Torreon, Guadalajara, and León. There's also a notable presence in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, where a number of indigenous Mexicans have converted to Islam. In recent years, there's been a small but growing trend of Muslims moving to smaller towns or rural areas. Some are drawn by job opportunities, while others are looking to establish more tight-knit Muslim communities away from the hustle and bustle of big cities. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the challenges faced by the Muslim population in Mexico. It's not all smooth sailing, but it's important to understand these issues to get the full picture. First off, let's talk about the elephant in the room, visibility, or rather, the lack of it. Muslims in Mexico are such a small minority that many Mexicans have never met a Muslim in person. This leads to a big challenge: widespread lack of awareness about Islam. You've got people confusing Muslims with Sikhs, or thinking all Muslims are Arabs. It's not uncommon for Muslims to find themselves constantly explaining the basics of their faith, which can get pretty tiring. This lack of visibility also means there's a shortage of Islamic infrastructure. We're talking about a serious lack of mosques here. In the whole country, you can count the number of proper mosques on one hand. Most Muslims have to make do with small prayer rooms or gathering in someone's home. This makes it tough to build a sense of community, especially for folks living outside the main urban centers. Education is another big hurdle. There are very few Islamic schools in Mexico, so Muslim parents often struggle to provide their children with a solid grounding in their faith. Arabic classes, Quranic studies, these are usually DIY affairs, with parents teaching at home or communities organizing weekend classes. It's not ideal, especially for families who want their kids to have a strong Islamic education. Now, let's talk about food. Yeah, I know we touched on this earlier, but it's a daily challenge that can't be overstated. Mexico's cuisine is amazing, but it's also heavy on pork and lard. Finding halal food can be like a treasure hunt. Some Muslims have turned to vegetarianism out of necessity. Others spend a lot of time and energy seeking out halal options or adapting recipes. It's doable, but it's an extra layer of complexity in daily life. Employment can also be tricky. While there's no widespread discrimination, Muslims sometimes face challenges in the workplace. Think about it. In a country where business lunches are a big deal, how do you explain that you're fasting during Ramadan? Or that you need a break for prayer? Some Muslims report feeling pressure to hide their faith at work to avoid complications. Let's not forget about cultural integration. Many Muslims in Mexico are immigrants or children of immigrants. They're balancing their Islamic faith with Mexican culture, and sometimes that's a tough act. How do you participate in traditional Mexican festivals that might have Catholic elements? How do you explain to your kids why they can't join in some popular cultural practices? There's also the challenge of maintaining Islamic practices in a predominantly Catholic country. During Ramadan, for example, the call to prayer isn't broadcast publicly like it is in some Muslim-majority countries. Muslims have to rely on apps or their own timekeeping to know when to break their fast. For women who choose to wear hijab, there can be additional challenges. While Mexico is generally tolerant, hijab-wearing women sometimes report feeling out of place or attracting unwanted attention, especially in areas where the Muslim population is very small. Another issue is the lack of official recognition for Islamic marriages. While freedom of religion is guaranteed in Mexico, the country doesn't officially recognize marriages performed solely under Islamic law. This means many Muslims have to have both a religious ceremony and a civil ceremony to ensure their marriage is legally recognized. Access to Islamic financial services is virtually non-existent in Mexico. For Muslims who want to follow Islamic principles in their financial dealings, this can be a significant challenge. Lastly, there's the issue of representation. With such a small population, Muslims in Mexico often struggle to have their voices heard in national conversations about religion and culture. They're working on building bridges and increasing understanding, but it's an uphill battle. All right, let's dive into the topic of Islamophobia in Mexico. It's a complex issue, and to be honest, it looks quite different here compared to some other countries. First off, it's important to note that Mexico doesn't have the same history of tension with the Islamic world that some European countries or the United States have. There's no significant organized anti-Islamic movement in Mexico, and you won't find political parties campaigning on anti-Muslim platforms. That's the good news. However, that doesn't mean Islamophobia doesn't exist in Mexico. It does, but it often takes more subtle forms, largely stemming from ignorance rather than active hostility. Remember how we talked about the lack of visibility for Muslims in Mexico? Well, this plays a big role here. A lot of the Islamophobia in Mexico is based on stereotypes and misinformation. You've got people who've never met a Muslim in their life, but they've seen news reports about extremist groups or Hollywood movies that portray Muslims negatively. This leads to some Mexicans having a skewed view of Islam. Sometimes Islamophobia in Mexico gets mixed up with general xenophobia or racism. Muslims might face discrimination not because of their religion per se, but because they're perceived as foreign or different. This is especially true for Muslims who are visibly of Middle Eastern or South Asian descent. There have been isolated incidents of harassment or discrimination reported by Muslims in Mexico. For example, some women who wear hijab have reported being stared at or even verbally harassed in public spaces. But it's important to note that these incidents are not widespread or systematic. In the media, portrayal of Muslims and Islam can be problematic at times. Mexican media often relies on international news sources for stories about the Muslim world, which can lead to a focus on conflict and extremism rather than everyday life for ordinary Muslims. This can reinforce negative stereotypes. Now, when it comes to organized anti-Islamic groups, there's not much to report. Unlike in some countries where you might find activist groups specifically targeting Muslims, this isn't really a thing in Mexico. The challenges Muslims face are more about general lack of understanding than organized opposition. That said, there have been a few instances of tension. For example, when plans were announced to build a mosque in Torreon some years back, there was some local opposition. But this was more about concerns over change in the neighborhood than any organized anti-Islamic sentiment. It's worth noting that the Mexican government officially supports freedom of religion and has laws against religious discrimination. However, enforcement of these laws can be inconsistent, and many Muslims feel that authorities don't always take complaints of religious discrimination seriously enough. On the flip side, there are efforts to combat Islamophobia and promote understanding. Some Islamic centers in Mexico organize open houses and educational events to introduce non-Muslims to Islamic culture and beliefs. There are also interfaith initiatives where Muslim leaders work alongside Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish leaders to promote religious tolerance. In recent years, there's been a growing interest in Islam among some Mexicans, particularly in indigenous communities. This has led to some positive coverage of Islam in the media and has helped to counter some stereotypes. Social media has played a role too. Young Mexican Muslims have been using platforms like TikTok and Instagram to share their experiences and educate others about Islam. This grassroots approach has been pretty effective in reaching younger Mexicans and challenging misconceptions. Educational institutions, particularly universities, have also started to play a role in promoting understanding. Some universities now offer courses on Islamic history and culture, which helps to provide a more nuanced view of Islam to students. So, to sum it up, while Islamophobia exists in Mexico, it's not as pronounced or organized as in some other countries. The challenges are more about overcoming ignorance and stereotypes than combating active hostility. Muslims in Mexico are working hard to increase visibility, educate their fellow citizens, and integrate into society while maintaining their faith. All right, folks, that wraps up our journey through the fascinating world of Islam in Mexico. We've traveled from the days of secret Muslims among the conquistadors to the vibrant, diverse Muslim communities in modern-day Mexico City and beyond. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and the beautiful blending of cultures. Whether you're learning about this for the first time, or you're part of the Muslim community in Mexico, I hope this video has given you some food for thought. It's amazing how a faith born in the deserts of Arabia has found a home among the vibrant streets and rich traditions of Mexico. If you enjoyed this dive into one of Mexico's lesser-known communities, why not stick around for more? There's a whole world of untold stories and hidden histories out there, and I'm on a mission to bring them to light. Hit that subscribe button to join me on this journey of discovery. Who knows what fascinating cultural intersections we'll explore next? And hey, if you're watching this from Mexico, whether you're Muslim or not, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Are there aspects of Muslim life in Mexico that we missed? Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, amigos. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.